today's class. So, projector is on. And so actually last time we were talking about all the issues related and coming from the transmission mechanisms, how central banks are struggling to have an influence on the economy, and how they are intervening on the field of lending and bond markets, and banking is influenced by the central bank. We had a general picture about that, and actually later I ended with the exchange rate. So how all this thing is related to the exchange rate. So because mostly we are thinking that exchange rates are related to the interest rate premium. So if you are providing higher interest rates than the other country, then actually capital will flow into this economy, and that's why interest rate will appreciate. The problem is that on Monday I was teaching international financial management for master students, and there is a point when you have to talk about exchange rates and exchange rate forecasting. And actually, when we are building models, forecasting models, which are really simple, so we are just using completely the same thing what is behind me on the what is the canvas? Yeah, on the canvas. Actually, they are not working. So right now, and this is a bit accepted by the literature as well, that since 2008, this interest rate differential or interest rate premium rules are not working because central banks are trying to manage this permanent crisis since 2008. So there's always a trouble of weak demand or poor demand in the economy, and they are trying to accommodate lending, so providing easing lending conditions both on conventional banking or both in the case of bond markets. And somehow they were negated, or they were able to reject this relation or this rule on the capital markets, and actually nobody knows that how can you overcome this situation. So right now there are many articles when they are testing different variables, that which one is working, which one is not. So we are always troubling or trying to use, for example, capital flow variables, capital flow related variables, that if money is still flowing in the economy, then it should appreciate the currency. But we have mixed results. So sometimes it's working, sometimes it's not. So for US dollar euro exchange rate, they are quite good. But for example, on Monday, I was trying to show students that how Hungarian forint and Czech koruna, which are both of them are small and open economies, can be modeled against each other. And the model was efficient at some points, but you were not able to forecast with it. So then it was falling to pieces. So maybe past data, historical data was, we were able to backtrace it, but that was all. So it was highly useless. So after mentioning or starting the introduction that I'm highly teaching right now some useless issues, still we have to see that what can be the possible objectives of the central banks, because this is also a topic which is developing so much in the recent decades. So since the early periods of time of mankind until the 1970s, it was absolutely clear for everybody that central banks should focus to maintain the exchange rates value stable. So that was the exchange rate focus. Then you are fixing the exchange rate against another, or mostly against gold or some precious metals, and without any kind of conditions, you have to exchange or currency to the gold. Or after the Second World War, it was the same thing, just the US dollar was fixed to gold without conditions, and the rest of the currencies were fixed against the US dollars. Just it was not working at all. So it ended with a disaster in the 70s. So that was the era of really high inflation. That was the period when unemployment was rising in Western countries, so in the US and also in Europe as well. Central banks were trying to increase economic activity, so they were cutting down interest rates until actually inflation was higher or sometimes double than the interest rate, and it still had absolutely no stimulating impact. And after that, they had to realize that maybe central banks should follow or pursue other primary objectives. So, and actually, from 1971 until 1992, once the idea of inflation targeting was created and accepted widely, then nobody had any kind of idea that what should be the primary objectives of central banks and how should they achieve it. So it's plenty of some years, so nearly 20 years when, or more than 20 years, when they had absolutely no idea what to do. So there were some interim models when they were trying to do something, but there was no cohesion or coherent framework that what is your objective and how can you achieve it, just mingling with stuff. So actually, if you are looking for some data that what is followed today by central banks, I think last week I also mentioned this, that there isn't always an up-to-date database published by the IMF. I hope that I have Wi-Fi, but also I have internet connection, because usually it's not the same thing. I have it. So this is a really good database because countries can define many things in their legislation, that what is the primary objective of, no, not this one. So, oh, I was thinking that it's leading me in the right direction, but let's go. IMF RAR. Something like this report, but it always finds this. Yeah, that's the most recent one. When there is a there is the huge download me button. Yes. So it will download itself, and then we can open it. So actually here, this report is much better because partially this is their job to have this definition and to categorize countries, so they are way more precise than the rest of the databases. And in this case, we can see that what kind of arrangement is pursued, followed, and actually what is the monetary policy framework in the country. So we can see that majority of the planet actually follows some sort of exchange rate targeting. We can say that, yeah, significant amount of countries are fixing their exchange rate against the US dollar or against the euro, and that's all completely perfect. Or sometimes they are creating a portfolio, they are saying that taking 45% of US dollar, 45% of euro, and maybe 10% of British pounds. This is what the Russian Federation followed for some years in the past. Because it's really good. The problem with fixing the US dollar is that if the US dollar appreciates, then your exchange rate will appreciate as well. And Argentina was falling to a crisis partially because of this in the early 2000s, because half of their export went to the European Union and half of their export went to the US. But they fixed the peso only against the US dollar, and once US dollar appreciated, then actually they started to lose their European markets, and yeah, it ended badly. So that's why composite seems to be better. Just just in this case, what you have to define that you have to structure all the foreign exchange reserves, and you need a nice rule for that. So many countries that don't want to deal with this at all. But we can see that, for example, Vietnam or Singapore or Syria or no other, Botswana as well, Morocco. In the past, maybe Iran was there as well. Okay, yeah, not. And actually, later on I will define it, but inflation targeting framework, this is the mainstream since 1992. Actually, it was at the beginning developed and introduced and implemented in New Zealand, so it wasn't invented in the US. Actually, some part of the literature says, because later on I will talk about Taylor rule, and actually Taylor works at the US central bank, just somehow it was not implemented there at the beginning. And actually still we can see that there is something like this called monetary aggregate targeting, which is like a dinosaur. So in the late 70s, it was really popular that someone should focus on the amount of money in the system, which is ridiculous because we know that most of the money is located on bank deposits, so not in cash. So that's why physically you can't say that you want to focus on the amount of cash in the system. You have to focus on these monetary aggregates, like not just cash, but also bank deposits, long-term deposits, money market. I don't know what is actually money market shares, because there is no such an asset in European legislation, but usually it's money market fund and what is located there. So short-term, really short-term investment fund. And altogether, you want to focus on the amount of all of this kind of quasi-money kind of assets. And actually, this is a nightmare. So in the US, they tried it in 1979 and they abandoned it in 1982. And not because it was not so successful. 1,000 US banks went to default due to this, but it was able to cut back the inflation on the other hand. But it was highly useless, because once they defined all the objectives, they defined all the equations which would guide the monetary policy. So the equation was that, oh, if we are increasing the interest rate here, then the amount of money will be reduced there. So something like this they built up, and all of this equation was falling apart within 3 years. So the head of the Canadian National Bank had this quote that we did not abandon the targets abandoned us. And after that, we have to wait for 10 years until they came up with the next idea of focusing only on the inflation and building up and managing all the yield curve, what I was teaching you last week. So it's funny to see that still we can find 26 countries on the planet which are focusing on monetary aggregate targeting. And actually, I was not able to understand it in the past, but now we have a really good PhD student called Trung Bui. He is from Vietnam. And actually, his topic and focus is partially on the exchange rate regimes of different emerging economies. So not on the developed countries, but the rest of the world. And mostly, he was telling me that monetary aggregate targeting is followed by countries where capital markets are not so developed. So mostly they have to import way more capital than, for example, Hungary or Czech Republic or other small and open economies should, and they would not be able to implement an inflation targeting framework because of this underdeveloped financial system. So for them, actually, monetary aggregate targeting is perfect, and it works fine. But after, if you are reaching some size in the economy, some level of GDP, some level of savings to GDP ratios, then you are not able to continue this. So it's a really interesting thing that which countries can we find here? Actually, it's constantly changing. So some countries are moving to one category to another in each year. So it's always interesting to see that who is where. So let's go back. So what is the primary objective of the central banks? So actually it depends on them. You can see I kept here these numbers because it's at least before the great financial crisis. Now they are looking old, but the financial crisis created so many innovations. So before of that other category was nearly empty or completely empty. But right now we find here countries like Switzerland or United States or the entire Eurozone. So that's why it's much more reliable to say that yeah. So before the crisis it was much more clear that who is doing what. Because most of the countries in the other categories still they are following some sort of inflation targeting framework, just with so many unconventional steps that everybody was afraid of this, that they started to mingle with the rules. And at the beginning, when you are deviating from rules, it can be a great idea because, oh, I can improve my efficiency of the politics. Just the problem is that after mingling with the rules for 12 years, nowadays many people who were there and had the idea to change or improve the instruments and to start to purchase, for example, long-term government bonds or long-term corporate bonds are not working there anymore. So they disappeared from decision making, disappeared from the back office, so who did the research, and it's always the problem that maybe this will be the reason of the next crisis. Okay, without COVID, so the next crisis. So this can happen many times that crisis solutions are generating the next problem. It's like flying on a plane upside down. You can do it just after that. If you are start to make other amendments, then it can end with a rapid unscheduled disassembly. So, what is exchange rate anchor? In this case, central bank completely focuses on the currency, on the exchange rate, and actually, in this case, they are focusing on the asset side of the central bank, and they are focusing completely on the foreign exchange reserves. So, let's make some beautiful art, handcrafted works. So, as always, counting can be useful. at some levels, even from financial point of view. So this is the central bank balance sheet. And in the case of focusing on the exchange rate, then we are saying that, okay, this is the amount of money in circulation. Obviously, it's always on the liability side of the bank, because we know that this is the asset and this is the source of liability side. And actually, we can say that here on the asset side there will be some sort of foreign exchange reserves. And of course, you can say that it can be gold as well. So let's give some nice green colors for that. At least for me it's green. My color vision is not that well, so I cannot be a jet pilot. Not if even I wanted, but so we could say that, okay, it can be gold also. Just it's in this case they are a bit the same. But what is the difference between keeping a gold reserve or keeping foreign exchange reserves? Obviously, in this case, you have to collect these foreign exchange reserves somehow. So the simplest way is to collect some loans, some funds also in foreign exchange reserve or foreign exchange. So deposits is big enough, or should I increase the size of the letter? It's okay. Because, oh, it's completely different color for you. Much better. Just the screen and the slides can be. So deposit in foreign exchange. So let's say that we are fixing our currency against US dollar. So because it's much better to have an example. So deposits in US dollar. Obviously, in this case, this foreign exchange reserve will be also kept in US dollar. And this US dollar can be collected from the domestic banks, so we can say that, okay, if we are walking on the street, that there are different banks, and some part of their money should be kept at the central bank. It can be mandatory, it can be voluntary, but at least we can say that domestic banks will keep their money here. And of course, we can take up loan from abroad. So foreign banks can be there as well. And so after that, we can say that, yeah, it's a nice thing, just we have to maintain the inflow. So we have to renew somehow this. So there are some problems. So renewing, expiring that in US dollar in this case. And until the exchange rate is fixed, there is no problem. So there is no risk of depreciation, and because obviously if the exchange rate depreciates, then maybe the need for deposits will increase as well. But okay, and but still renewing the expiring debt in US dollar means that portfolio flows global. So investment appetite will be a factor. So usually when these regimes are failing is when it loses the credibility. That market participants and external investors, foreign investors are thinking that the central bank will not able to maintain this system. And actually it gives a feedback, so they have no willingness to finance it anymore. And or they start to ask for higher interest rates. Because obviously interest rate will be a really important thing, so it will be foreign. And I'm not supposed to use it this way. No. Come on. Okay. This should be a function, but for some reason it not reacts on the. Okay. Then let's do it in the old-fashioned way. Over index. So the problem will be that you have to pay the interest for the foreign investor. Obviously, you have to pay some interest rates also to the domestic depositors. Maybe it can be lower if you want or if they want to pay it. But the problem is that somehow you have to invest this money. And how? You cannot, so it have to be always directed to foreign assets. So you cannot say that I will give some loans to my domestic banks or any kind of domestic agencies because it will not able to meet with the definition of foreign exchange reserves, and then it will be not accepted by rating agencies and all the other guys outside. So in this case, you have to say that I have to purchase foreign assets. So just let's make some free spaces for us. And in this case, this foreign asset should be denominated in US dollar. So it actually limits what we can purchase. So mostly it will be US, so American government bonds. And mostly that's all. Or maybe we can put some money into deposits at US banks, but it pays less. So mostly we can say that that's all what we can purchase.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Is it necessary for a country to have foreign exchange? I mean, US dollar.
Actually, you have to, because it's a good question. That would be the next problem, that you need this, regardless actually the exchange rate regime, because you need it if so. Banks and companies usually are taking up loans from abroad, and it's always necessary to cover at least all the foreign debt which expires in the actual year. So short-term external debt should be covered.
So the bank must have the reserve.
Yes, yes.
And is it necessary to be always in the US dollar?
No, no. Oh, actually, it can be. So, yeah. Uh, 60 something percent of the foreign reserves are in US dollar nowadays. Uh, Last time, if I remember, it was 65 or something like this. And but in euro, it's around 30 something percent. So there are some countries, but in this case, you have to fix your exchange rate against the euro. And we can see this is not that popular. So we can find 25 countries who are doing this. Uh, there is way more. So usually euro is popular in African countries. So in Western African currency or monetary union and also in Central African monetary union, they are using euro as the currency. But for example, in Latin America or in the Caribbean islands or in the Middle East, usually US dollar is preferred much more. And actually, we can ask the question that why it happens for some reason. So I know that in Western African Monetary Union and in Central African Monetary Union, uh, they fixed it to the French franc because of historical reasons, and then they were just switching to euros. In Latin America, it's also clear why to do that because still major trade partner. In Middle East, maybe because of oil export, is the major currency of.
So it's mean that US dollar is an international currency?
Yes, 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 yes. And partially this is the reason of it, and actually uh, makes the situation for US debt funding really comfortable because actually US government bonds will be not just purchased by US entities, but also there will be many central banks who have to purchase uh, US dollar or US government bonds because this is how they can invest their foreign exchange reserves. So that's the reason that some countries where the foreign exchange reserves are big enough, then they are starting to invest their or part of their foreign exchange reserves as long-term investment funds. They are called the sovereign wealth funds. Later there will be a section about them as well. And for example, we can find sovereign wealth funds in China, also in Norway, in Russia. So there are many countries which are playing with this, and in this case, they can invest not just in conservative assets like government bonds, but they can purchase shares in companies, or they are focusing on creating a more diversified portfolio of different currencies and different assets. So in this case, they are focusing on achieving return on their investment. In this case, when it's about foreign exchange reserve, you want to just be liquid and keep your liquidity in the foreign markets as well. And mostly it's a last resort feature. So if there is a global financial crisis, actually this maintains your credibility. That's or your expiring debt can be paid within a year, and mostly it's working. So rating agencies are focusing on this benchmark. And actually, it's better than using gold because gold has no interest payments and the price is fluctuating at the same time. So that's why it was not preferred by central banks during the 90s and the 2000s, and this just changed in the 2010s when the gold prices were increasing, and since then China or Russia purchased a lot of gold, so they started to increase their gold reserves. Just still, actually, physical gold is not enough. So there is, if we would like to exchange over the foreign exchange reserve to gold reserve, there is not enough gold on that planet to do that physically. But what is the benefit of using gold reserves is that you can purchase it completely from domestic sources. So you can say that deposits in local currency. Mm. Uh, and also, so first of all, you have all the problem of the foreign exchange reserve. So if you are fixing your exchange rate against the US dollar, then still there is the problem. Oh my, I was right, copying it to the wrong place. Uh, so still there is the problem that even the domestic interest rates should be guided by the maintenance of the fluctuation of the interest rate. So let's define additional components. So when we are saying that loans to banks in domestic currency, this poor money is always going away, but that's yeah. Deposits from banks in domestic currency. Actually, their interest rates still be a factor. Obviously, it will be local currency interest rate. And actually, this will be linked up to the yield curve, so we know that it will be connected to everything what we were learning in the last week. But but right now it will be really important for us that right. To maintain the stability of the exchange rate, we have to maintain this higher interest rate premium. So, excuse me, yes.
Does the government pay interest on the fixed reserve? I mean, the US dollar.
Uh-huh. Yes, yeah,
To
yeah.
whom?
Uh, excuse me. Can you repeat it? Just.
Does the, like, for example, if a central bank is fixed reserve of US dollar,
Uh-huh.
so as this is the asset of the central bank or it's And
Uh,
the gold, the central bank pay interest for that.
Actually, it will be really close to the bond market yields, but it can be a bit bigger than that. So yeah, so practically it's a bit theoretical because to capture it well, we would like to have to make a weighted average for all the loans what they are taking up from abroad. In practice, when we want to calculate it, we're just taking the 10-year government bond yields, and this is the proxy variable for that when you want to find something which is really close to represent, and uh, and that's all. So actually, this can be really expensive to maintain a fixed exchange rate system because on one hand, your entire domestic economy should be paying the price of this exchange rate premium, and on the other hand, to maintaining this foreign exchange reserve, actually, it will be also really expensive because you are losing money on this. So on each US dollar, what you are keeping there from loan, you can see it in 2000s and 2010. So we can say that conservatively, let's say that you can earn 2% of interest in a year here. But for example, if we have to finance our country, so when we have to take up a loan or on our own, and obviously our credit rating is not so good than like the US. So US is rated for AA, which is almost the best. It's not AAA, but something. For example, Hungary is rated as double B, maybe. Yeah, yeah, double B. So it's still not worse, just it's in the middle category. And so in this hypothetical situation, when we are assuming that, okay, let's say Hungary is fixing their currency to the US dollar, actually you are able to take up a loan maybe at 5% of interest. So on each US dollar, theoretically you are losing 3% of interest rates annually. And at a huge reserve size, then it can be uh, expensive. So, so that's why it was this problem and also the maintenance. So both of them all together, it can be expensive, and and that's why people are saying that fixing exchange rates are not modern. So usually the problem is also that, for example, countries are defining an exchange rate which is fixed in 1990. And then the country develops and so on. So sooner or later, these countries uh, in Latin America or in East Asia always realized, at least within a decade, that now they should change their exchange rate because their internal environment and external environment was changing as well. So it's too rigid. And that was the reason that there were many currency crises in the 90s because they were defining uh, the exchange rate not so well, or just the environment was changing. So that's why, yeah, we can say that this objective can be simple, focusing exchange rate, but also it's expensive in many cases. Yeah. And yeah, crawling peg. Actually, it would be a really good heavy metal band name, but crawling peg means that it's usually a tool for consolidation of the economy. So, so what is happening in usually fixed exchange rates? Then you are defining, then let's say, hypothetical case that 1 euro will be 215 Hungarian forints. And then market forces are allowing to fluctuate around this by, it can be 1% plus minus plus 1%, or usually it can be 2.25%. It depends on the country. Just usually they are choosing one of these. Sorry, it's not. It's in English, so it's a dot. And that can be also fluctuating other directions. So usually when you are really close to the band, so this is the fixed exchange rate. So all these places central bank should react. So foreign exchange reserves or interest rate. Actually, until it's credible for the market players, then usually they are not going near the edge of the band, but yeah. Just in this case, you have absolutely no idea to where to fix the Hungarian forint. So let's say that it's 250, but we can ask the question that why? Why it's not 300, 400 or 100? And in many cases, countries have absolutely no idea. So maybe they are just creating some theoretical model, or maybe they are doing nothing at all. So between 1990 and 1995, actually in Hungary there was namely a fixed exchange rate regime, but they were constantly devaluating the Hungarian forint, and it was a random devaluation. So in some weeks nothing happened, or some months nothing happened, then the government said that okay, let's devalue the Hungarian forint by 20%. So it obviously erodates trust in the currency, it generated high inflation, it generated high interest rates and lack of funding. So this is the most useless thing what you can do. So if you have to consolidate your economy, then crawling peg can be a much better arrangement. Because in this case, you know that the exchange rate should be devaluated. So, for example, in Poland or in Hungary or in Czech Republic, once the Soviet Union was collapsing, then we lost most of our markets. And the technology was outdated and so on. So it had to be completely recreated from scratch. So 1/3 of the GDP disappeared because it was already useless. So it was nothing new for the people. So Western European capital had to be imported again, like before of that for centuries, and to transfer the entire market. But it was, and also the entire institutional background had to be changed, so new laws had to be written. So it was a really anarchistic period, and as a result, you don't know what is the exchange rate because you are changing the entire country and the economy and even the name of the country. So in this case, you can't say that, okay, they tried to say that, but it was a disaster. So sooner or later, you are saying that, okay, currency should be devaluating because your external imbalances are deep, so you have to devaluate the currency. And in this case, you can say that, okay, let's define it that you are defining the currency on monthly basis, and actually you can skip it into or scale it down until hours or minutes. Uh, let's say that -5%. So we are defining some monthly scares. If I remember well, then it was variant rolling back. Ah, Hungary's pre-announced rolling back. It's so nice. Just let's see that what we have here. Do we have any hard data? Just for fun, if it's already here. If I remember well, it was some percentages. They announced it in 6 months. Okay, that's not 1 month. Convention band, yeah. Okay, whatever. So they are defining previously that they have a depreciation on a monthly basis. Actually, there is still a fluctuation band, so they are saying that plus and minus 2.25 will be what is allowed by the market to fluctuate from the middle of the band, but it's much better to draw a new one. But actually it's a really good way how to reduce external imbalance, inflation, and interest rates down. So it was really strange that during the 90s all Latin American and Eastern Asian countries were focusing on fixed exchange rates, and usually all of them were struggling with currency crisis sooner or later. In Central and Eastern Europe, for some reasons, I don't know why, but they introduced these rolling peg regimes, and even during Russian crisis in 1998, these systems were still working and performing well. So nobody was telling that, oh, it's not credible, and there was no currency crisis. At least we were able to avoid this because there were so many other issues. But it's always for consolidation. So it cannot be permanent. So sooner or later, these countries abandon this crawling peg and they introduce the free floating exchange rates where the market will evaluate this thing in. So it's for. So let's say that there is an arrow, and there will be in the future. So yeah. And also we can find similar thing in the case of China, just in the opposite direction. So CNI USD 30 years. Yeah. So in the early 90s, Chinese renminbi was devaluated against the US dollar. Then you can see that there was a period during the second half of the 90s and the most of the 2000s. So there were a decade once or until the renminbi was fixed against the US dollar. So it was like here. But after that, they were reaching the point when the external trade surplus was so huge that actually the central bank of China because if your external balance is surplus, so it's big, your exports are way bigger than your import, then your currency would appreciate naturally. So in this case, you have to purchase all these excessive exchange rates on the market, uh, sorry, not you have to sell constantly your exchanges to improve the amount of money in circulation, otherwise this appreciation would happen. And it means that you are purchasing constantly US dollars. Otherwise, and in this case, the balance sheet of the Chinese central bank exploded. So the biggest foreign exchange reserves all time was created to maintain and to stabilize these exchanges. So sooner or later, it was ridiculous to keep it this way. So they were switching to crawling peg just upwards. So not downwards for depreciation. It was still a consolidation because nobody knows that what should be the optimal exchange rate for the renminbi. So that's why it was appreciated. Then again they were switching back to crawling peg. Then it was allowed again for a crawling peg. Yeah, it was fixed. Then crawling peg again to appreciate again. Then it was depreciating, then appreciating. So uh, nowadays, and after that, I'm absolutely confused at what is happening there because in the past several years, Chinese central bank was switching to a composite currency index with 27 currencies. Last time I checked, so now it's much more difficult to see that. But in this time period, it was really simple. What is happening there? So and yeah, and then actually in this section there are different um, time periods which are presented. So how gold standard was operating for nearly a century before the stupid First World War. But actually paper money was completely convertible for gold reserves. It looks nice and it's simple, just the problem is that in this case your entire interest rate um, structure will be the hostage of this gold reserve maintenance. So interest rate fluctuations were way bigger than today, for example, or during the last decades. That's why actually there are many papers, historical papers nowadays, which are saying that sooner or later they had to abandon this because it was it was really simple for the exchange rate, just not for GDP management, not for employment management, not for interest rate management or serving the bank. So it was it had this problem. Or Bretton Woods system after the Second World War, when it was also obvious in the last year of the Second World War to fix the US dollar against the gold because more than half of the gold reserves were already in the US. And because Europe was completely elevated to ground, and also Japan because of the war, uh, then these countries needed 10 years to rebuild themselves. And they needed already World Bank funds and other funding like this. So, and they had to conduct their trade with the United States. So, at that time it was obvious. Just the problem is that, okay, once the honeymoon period is over, in the 60s, they started to face with problems, most of all. What is happening then when you are saying that my exchange rate is worth gold, and at the same time you have inflation at home? And you are trying to stimulate your economy by low interest rates, and also you are providing fiscal stimulus, so actually you have huge projects, social projects. You have the entire Cold War, where you have to develop jet fighters, bombers, rockets, and all the stuff like this. Uh, in this case, it will be really expensive, and it means that your public debt will increase. So on one hand, we are saying that your currency is fixed against the gold, and on the other hand, we are saying that you are accommodative and really huge levels. It generates inflation, so the internal purchasing power of the US dollar is constantly decreasing because of inflation, and it's not able to appear in the exchange rate. And at the beginning, it was started to appear in after 1965 because that was the point when the U.S. Central Bank was warning the Senate that there will be high inflation if you are doing nothing. Obviously, they did nothing at all. So after that, European countries started to uh, became angry. First of all, De Gaulle, but later he was losing the elections. But still, the problem was that they realized that to maintain the exchange rate system, to maintain the US dollars value, to maintain the French francs versus US dollar exchange rate and so on, they had to take out the excessive US dollars from the system. So they had to purchase the US dollar and put it into their foreign exchange reserves to avoid the collapse of the Bretton Woods system. So it was like a quasi tax for them, and they were unhappy. Also for raw material importer countries, exporter countries, the oil countries, it was also terrible because you are not able to sell your oil and you are not able to import the same amount of goods for this asset. So not just the XAU. So during this time period, not just the gold was, okay, then that's 100 years. So this is when the gold standard and this Bretton Woods system exists. We can see that the gold market price, market value was quite stable, but BTI, yeah, okay, CLF, yeah, thanks. But also we can see that also oil prices were absolutely flat. So it's not just about the gold, but all other raw material prices were not changing at all, or they were changing not so much, while at the same time the purchasing value of the US dollar is decreasing. After this point, it goes down. So obviously it ended badly. So oil crisis and all the other stuff happened next to other historical events. Uh, so mostly since then we are saying it that so you can't use a national currency as a world currency at the same time because central banks can focus on your domestic issues to support employment, to support low inflation and so on, and they can't take an attention on what is happening outside. Still, they have to do this because uh, there are many reports. So, if US Fed or European Central Bank has a meeting to make decisions, then the board of governors are always mentioning that, oh, there are foreign factors like growth in China, and if we are increasing interest rates, then it can have an adverse impact on there, so that's why we should not do that. But it's really tricky because in this case you are playing outside and inside the same game or different games and never ends badly. So yeah. European monetary system. Actually, in this case, before introduction of the euro, they had another idea to fix European individual currencies against each other. That was the snake agreement. At that time, they were thinking between 1971 and 1979 that if they are taking 9 different currencies and they are fixing them against each other with such bands, then they can maintain such a system. Just it means that your currency should be fixed against 9 different currencies, and it was a mess. So maybe it was working for several months, and after that, what happened that West German mark was jumping out from this system, and Danish krona and I don't know what was the Netherlandish money, maybe gulden or something like this, was following it, and none of the others, so not the French franc, not the British pounds, not the Italian lira, so they were falling down. And yeah. So in the case of the ECU, it was an artificial currency, so they generated it as a weighted average. So what they were saying that, okay, West Germany has 30 something percentage from all the foreign trade of the European communities, while at the same time Italy has 10%, Britain has 10%, Great Britain has also 10%, and then they were adding this weight to the currencies, and then on this basis they were generating the exchange rate of the ECU. And it was much better because they were fixing their national currencies against the ECU after that. So if West German mark was increasing by 1 unit, then the entire ECU was just increasing by or appreciating by 30 or 0.3 units, and that's why it was easier to maintain. Just there was absolutely no central bank behind that. Again, fiscal policy, monetary policy was absolutely not harmonized, so nobody cared about it from institutional point of view. So that's why there was no money behind that. So they were able to maintain it for a decade and a bit more until they introduced the euro. Just it was much more like a temporary solution because and there is this pragmatic monetarism. I started to talk about it already today, and this is when you are trying to regulate all the banking system through their mandatory reserves. So you know that commercial banks are collecting deposits, and they can lend it out to households, companies, somewhere. Uh, but in this case, when they have to make mandatory reserves, it means that they have to channel some part of this money and to put it into deposits at the central bank. And right now in Europe, it's 1% or sometimes it's less than 1%. But for example, in China in the 2000s, there were cases when we were able to find 20%. So it can be really strict sometimes that you are trying to guide all the lending, but you are practically micromanaging the entire banking sector. So you are saying that, okay, you are able to give loan under these conditions and the rest of the money should be channeled in. And in this case, you can slow down the amount of money in circulation to avoid inflation, but it's a nightmare actually. So the US was able to do it for 3 years, but it was also killing more than 1,000 banks, so that was the US savings bank crisis, just it was not that famous because only small banks went to default. So actually, since then, there's this pools analysis, it's referred in many cases, so that's why I write it here, that interest rates is much better function than money supply, so micromanaging lending in the banking system, because you are changing it and mostly market reacts on it. If not, then that will be unconventional monetary policy, what is happening in this decade, or now it's last decade. And inflation targeting. Actually, inflation targeting is what I was talking here. Yeah, here. So when you are managing short-term interest rates and you are waiting for that it will have sooner or later on the impact on the long-term interest rates for private entities and on their consumption and investment behavior, and sooner or later it will affect the inflation level. So this is all what I was talking last week, because just it's written here, and also this is one channel of lending, but also through the exchange rate, because still, if you have an impact uh, on the relationship between foreign and local uh, interest rates, then obviously we have an impact on the currency as well in most of the cases, and imported good prices will be affected by this phenomenon as well. So mostly this is how it stands from. And price stability is good for many reasons. Actually, for me, what is highly important here, but I can't see it right now. Yes. So actually, price stability is good because until inflation is low, then people who are living from working somewhere, who are living from wages, uh, they will have stable incomes and they are able to have savings. Once inflation increases, obviously it erodates their purchasing power, it erodates their savings, and this is not good for social order, not just happiness, but from political point of view, and it also can be problems when you want. So if savings are declining in an economy, then you have to borrow more and more money from abroad, and it can generate capital flight and all the nasty stuff what you want to avoid. So usually that's the reason that why they want to avoid this. And I think that we are stopping it here for today because Taylor rule requires a bit more time than 5 minutes. So